Coverage D is what we call loss of use. Different companies handle this a little bit differently. Some companies guarantee 12 months, 24 months. Some companies will do it as a percentage of coverage A. But what loss of use is, in the event of a catastrophe that you have to move out of your home, it will cover your living expenses. Now you're still going to have to pay your mortgage, but now you're renting an apartment, you're buying food at the restaurants, perhaps you're using a laundromat. It's going to reimburse you on all of those expenses. So it's very important to know you have enough of that. Coverage E, this is the biggie, liability. In case someone decides to sue you. Now, it could happen that somebody falls on your property and they decide to sue you, but this could cover other things. Perhaps you have a dog that runs down the street and bites the neighbor. Well, that didn't necessarily happen on your property, but your liability would cover that in case of a lawsuit. And then coverage F, medical payments to others. You have a party, everybody's there, somebody trips on the sidewalk, falls, you want to send them to the hospital, you've got usually $2,000 of medical payment coverage. If then they decide to sue you, your liability kicks in. So those are your basic coverages on a homeowner's policy.
Can I ask you a question, Catherine? Does that amount of coverage vary according to my deductible that I choose for the home, or are those solid, and what's the best way to choose a deductible?
That's a very good question, Steve. People have a lot of questions about deductibles. Homeowners insurance, just so you know, they look at claims a little bit differently than perhaps an auto policy would. In an auto policy, your increase in your premium is going to go up if you have a ticket or if you have an accident, but a little claim where maybe replacing a windshield or getting locked out of your car is really not going to affect your policy at all. However, on a homeowner's policy, when you make a claim, it will definitely adversely affect your premium. I encourage my homeowners to carry $1,000 deductible or higher if they feel comfortable doing that. This will discourage small claims that really won't help you in the long run. It'll just make your premiums go up. And if you can take care of something small, $500 or so out of your pocket, it will definitely help you in the long run. And speaking of claims, there's really two main types of claims. There's a catastrophe claim, known in the industry as a CAT claim, or something a little different, perhaps a theft claim. Just so you know, a CAT claim follows the residence. A theft claim will follow the policyholder. So even if you were living in Tennessee and somebody robbed you and you have that on your policy, what we call the clue report when they run to see how many claims you've had, that will still apply to your new residence. However, if you had a windstorm, took the roof off at a residence in Chicago, and now you're living in Colorado, most companies will not apply that claim. Some will, most of them will not.
That's a great insight. Thanks very much for that.
Speaking of claims again, I like to talk about the difference between water claims, flood. People ask me all the time about flood. Flood is something that, believe it or not, even though we're in an arid state that has a lot of mountains, there are certain parts of this state that have floodplains that do require flood insurance. You will know if you buy a house if you need flood insurance or not, because if you have a certain type of floodplain, your lender is going to require flood insurance. Basically what flood is, if 2 or more acres are underwater and there's 1 or more property adjacent to you, that is considered flood. The only time you will have coverage for that is if you have a separate flood policy. Flood policies are underwritten by FEMA, they're very expensive, and they really don't cover all that much. Now, if you have a flood and you have a flood policy, you're going to be very, very happy that you have it. But unless you are in a flood zone that is required by your lender, most policyholders choose not to purchase one. Something else about water claims. People ask me all the time, is this covered? Is this covered? How do I know if it's covered? I like to give an example of 2 policyholders of mine who had had similar claims that had to do with water. One was covered and one was not. I had a policyholder who had an older home. It was a rental property, and she had these renters in for quite a long time. The renters started complaining. They were feeling ill. They thought they had some illness, and she found that there was some mold in the house. Well, the policyholder called claims. Claims came out, and they wanted so desperately to pay a claim, but there was no way that they could cover it because they realized that the mold was caused by a slow leak that had been in the bathroom. There had been tiles missing, and they just couldn't cover it because it was really a maintenance issue. Another policyholder of mine had a house up in Evergreen. I don't know if you recall, a few years back we had a major snowstorm around Christmas. They had a house in Evergreen. The house was heated with a propane tank. They were down here. It was Christmas. It was the holidays. Snow came. They could not get back to their house. All the roads were blocked and closed. Finally, the propane disappeared out of the tank, and because of that, there was no heat in the house. The pipes froze. Then they burst, causing a lot of damage. That is a covered claim. Water claims, when you think about it, usually are sudden and unavoidable. Then it's probably covered. If it's a slow leak, a maintenance issue, you've got a hole in the roof you haven't fixed, probably not. Before we finish, I did want to talk about endorsements. There are a couple of endorsements that I always just systematically add to every one of my homeowners policies. One of them is ID fraud coverage. Identity fraud is becoming more and more of an issue. People are always worried about, can somebody get a hold of my personal information? What would happen? Could they cause all kinds of problems? I actually had a policyholder who had a horrible issue, probably one of the worst identity fraud problems I've ever seen. Identity fraud insurance, when you attach it to a homeowner's policy as an endorsement, is very inexpensive. Most companies charge $25 a year. What does it cover? It doesn't do what some of these companies do. It doesn't do any monitoring. If you called in with a claim, they wouldn't fix it. However, it's a reimbursement policy. It will pay to help you get your problem fixed. If you have to hire an attorney, if you need to send something overnight, if you have to hire a company that actually specializes in identity fraud restitution, it would cover that. Water backup coverage. This is something I, again, systematically just add to every single policy. Speaking of water, what water backup is, if you have a pipe, let's say you've got an older house and a tree branch goes through the pipe and now it's causing the sewers to back up into your house, unless you have this endorsement, you may not have any coverage. And it covers, things like your carpet, your drywall, things like that. And there's a separate deductible usually will apply to the water backup coverage. Other things that you can do, there's other endorsements. You could endorse jewelry, for instance. If you have a lot of expensive jewelry or artwork or furs, for instance, those are not necessarily covered under your personal property. Most policies will have personal property coverage on something like jewelry or fur up to $2,500 or $1,000 per item, up to the maximum of $2,500. More than that, you really should either write a separate policy for it or endorse your homeowners for that particular issue. That kind of covers it. There's other endorsements, of course, and you can talk to your policy professional.
I think that's one of the best descriptions overall of homeowners insurance I've ever heard. So it was very thorough, and I don't have any questions. If anyone does have questions, what's your cell phone number so they can reach you, Catherine?
Well, you can call my office number at 303-625-4085 or send me an email at cmarch, M-A-R-C-H, at insuranceaai.com.
And I'll go ahead and put that on this webpage, this post, so that people will have that available as well. And in the next section, we're going to cover the umbrella liability policy.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.